Jetzt kommen wir vor dem Mittag noch zu einem, ich sage dem unerfreulichen Thema, Cyberfraud, Cyberwar. Wir schlagen uns alle damit herum. Zeitlang hatten wir wahrscheinlich gemeint, ich auch, ja, ich habe jetzt da meine Firewalls und alles ist alles organisiert und dann kommt wieder irgendwas und dann ist es doch nicht so ganz einfach. Und auch hier sind wir froh, dass wir irgendwo so im Hintergrund, die werden dann manchmal eben hervorgeholt, wenn da was passiert, dass wir Leute haben, die das wirklich verstehen und die sich täglich damit auseinandersetzen. Und ich darf sagen, Carlo Hopstacken ist einer von diesen Personen. Er macht seit 25 Jahren in der Finanzindustrie, befasst er sich damit, mit dieser Cyber Security. Er ist bei der UBS AG. Und er ist auch, da erlaube ich mir hier eben noch einen Werbespot abzusetzen, er ist bei SWIFT jetzt, er ist der Koordinator für die Security-Geschichte in der Schweiz, also Security Officer, wenn Sie so wollen, für die SWIFT-Community in der Schweiz. Also Sie haben, nehme ich an, alle von Customer Security Programm gehört. Und wenn nicht, dann rate ich Ihnen dringend an, da mal reinzuschauen. Sie wissen, der Ausgang war diese Bangladesch-Geschichte, das haben Sie wahrscheinlich irgendwo gehört. Und letztlich geht es eigentlich immer um das Gleiche, also dass man eben aware ist, dass man eben seine Hausaufgaben macht, also die Systeme updatet und so weiter, auf dem neuesten Stand haltet, aber auch die Prozesse und die Organisation. Und SWIFT hat eben dieses Programm jetzt gestartet, also zu einem schönen Teil natürlich aus gutem Grund, weil hier Löcher sich auftaten, jetzt nicht unbedingt in SWIFT drin, sondern eben von den Teilnehmern her. Und man ist ja darauf angewiesen, dass alle eigentlich damit tun und das dazu beitragen, aber nicht zuletzt auch eben aus öffentlichem Druck. Und ich mache hier eben darauf aufmerksam, wir haben jetzt am Morgen, 18. Mai, oder? Christina Rigo nimmt noch Anmeldungen entgegen, sonst in Genf eine Roadshow dazu. Und am 30. Mai in Zürich, also wenn man nicht sicher ist, ob vom eigenen Institut da jemand geht, dann fragt sie ist da, auch über den Mittag. Und jetzt spreche ich als SWIFT-Präsident, also ich rate Ihnen dringend an, aus Ihren Instituten jemanden dahin zu schicken, dass man wenigstens weiß, um was es geht. Und man kann nicht alles an den Provider abschieben und sagen, ja, der macht das für mich. Und die aktuellste Geschichte, die haben wir jetzt gesehen in England, oder? Was da abläuft. Ich war auch also ziemlich erstaunt, oder? Also, dass ein ganzen Sektor in einem solchen hochentwickelten Land da praktisch schutzlos fast da irgendwie dem ausgeliefert ist. Aber so scheinbar gibt es das also. Und ich hoffe, dass unsere Finanzindustrie und unsere Infrastruktur, dass die besser gerüstet sind. Aber wie gesagt, also dazu Carlo Hopstacken, er wird uns jetzt einen Update oder er wird jetzt über diese Payment Fraud Geschichte sprechen. Er versteht zwar das Deutsch, aber er macht das in Englisch. Es hatte sowieso die Hälfte der Ausdrücke, oder Carlo, they are anyway in English, so you could start in English now. Please.
Thank you very much, Daniel. So good morning. It's still good morning, so that's good. So today the topic will be cyber fraud, and especially fraud related to attacks taking place currently against banking infrastructure. So I'm not talking too much today about payment fraud and fraud related to e-channels. What I would like to do is first to set the scene, so to give you some examples of cases we have seen in the industry, of real cases where a lot of money at the end was lost. Then I will explain a little bit how such an attack does take place, so what are the different steps. So you also have to understand how this works, because then you can also define what kind of controls, measures you need to have in place to, let's say, reduce the risk of such an event happening at your company. Then once I have explained the attacks taking place, I will give some examples of controls that needs to be in place. It's best practice. It's not always easy to fight against cyber criminals because they have a lot of resources. And at the end, I will give some general recommendations how to combat the cyber criminals. So let's start with, let's say 2 years ago, there was the so-called Carboneck hacking group. They were able to infiltrate multiple banks, where they were able to exfiltrate, they say 500 million, it can be up to 1 billion. So it really started 2 years ago. They are really sophisticated. Most of the losses were in Russia, but they also did target other banks at the end in other countries. The prime way of getting the money out was trying to infiltrate the infrastructures of the banks being attacked. Then the Bank Bangladesh case, Daniel already mentioned that briefly, so I think that's quite known here as well, where there was also an attempt made to, not only attempt made, but they were also quite successful to exfiltrate a lot of money. So at the end it was around 80 million, but they really tried to get 1 billion out. So I think on the other side they were quite lucky that even the cyber criminals make mistakes. So they made a small typo which prevented them from getting 1 billion instead of 80 million. So then during that year, so last year, was really a lot of activities in this space. So after the Bank Bangladesh case, there was also a bank in Vietnam, the same type of way of being attacked and how they tried to get the money out. Then we also had one within Ecuador. There was a bank that is now suing Wells Fargo. So I think that's a really interesting topic where this financial firm was, let's say, they were able to get into the infrastructure of this bank. They were able to get access to different payment systems, and they were able to make payment transfer via Wells Fargo. So I think the interesting case here is that now this bank is suing the other bank because they didn't do a good due diligence there to stop some of the payments. So I think that is a development we're currently seeing, and I think we have to be prepared for that. So we not only should rely on our third parties that execute payments on our infrastructure, but we also have some responsibilities there. Then we have Sonali. This is a small case, but that was reported last year, but this already took place a couple of years before. This was a cold case because they were never able to find out. But then when the Bank Bangladesh case happened, they found out, hey, this is the same type of attack. And those are those smaller cases that you normally don't hear about. Then there was one bank in Ukraine, same type of attack. They were able to get 10 million out. They didn't disclose the name of the bank. And last but not least, at the end of the year, the Russian central bank also had to confirm that they also were attacked and that also money at the end was transferred out. They were able to get some of the fund back, but at the end, the attack was successful. So this is just for me to set the scene, that you know this is a real issue. Banks do lose money here. So it's really important to understand who are behind those different attacks. If I look at the threat landscape, so let's start there first. So what are the different motivations? So on the left-hand side, you see the threat landscape. What we normally use is, we use a lot of threat intel. So we discuss with threat intel providers, but we also discuss with our counterparties what kinds of alerts they get, but also what kind of incidents they get. So what we have seen in the threat landscape is that the cyber criminals are getting more and more advanced. They really get the proper tool set. You have now services like ransomware as a service. So not sure if that happened over the weekend, but this is something that you can get now, and there are business models behind it. The same for botnets. So that's maybe a little bit technical, but you can also rent botnets to, let's say, perform your attack against whoever you want to perform an attack. If we look at the middle section where we have the threat actors, so we are not really too concerned about script kiddies. So those are the ones that just find scripts and just try to execute it, maybe to gain some money, but at the end they often are not successful. Hacktivists are not really that much in the picture nowadays. where they really try to do attacks based on religion or maybe due to other beliefs or to, let's say, ensure that certain companies get a bad reputation because they are being hacked. Terrorism, that's also a big topic. There are different nation states at the end that somehow support terrorists as well. So I don't want to go in that area. And I think the two most advanced are the organized crime and the nation state-sponsored, let's say, attacks or matters at the end. What I must say is that they have often the resources to conduct attacks. They also often take the time to prepare an attack. And what I have seen recently as well is that the gap between organized crime and the intelligence agencies and the national states are getting smaller. So organized crime is now getting better and better. Also the fact that often information from intelligence agencies about the ways how they are able to surveil employees or people or hack into systems which are now also being exposed openly on the internet, which is then quickly being used by organized crime. So if I just want to mention the WannaCry ransomware that happened over the weekend, this was let's say, an attack they prepared based on data that was leaked from an intelligence agency in the US, and they used then this exploits to really target and prepare those kind of attacks. On the right-hand side, regarding cyber risk scenarios, so we have now seen what is the motivation, what are the threat actors. So we see three different areas of concern. So one is cyber fraud. So that's more the topic I will address today. That's the other one, theft of data. I think that's quite known here in Switzerland, where sometimes data is quite valuable. But you also have industries like the movie industry, where also data is being stolen and then being made public. The last one, disruption of services. So that's like, let's say, the ransomware one, or where systems are being put down at the end. So my focus today will be on cyber fraud, but specifically on those attacks happening on banking infrastructure. So I would like to focus on the lower part of the slides, where we look at an advanced but persistent threat, as we call it in our industry, that are the most advanced attack currently taking place, where they have the tool set and the resource to do so. So the attacks normally start with preparation. So a criminal group will not start attacking a bank because they want to attack the bank. They first do their reconnaissance, so they try to get information about the bank. They try to find out who they can target within a bank. They even look at social media. So maybe some have in their profile, they are, let's say, a Swift security administrator, which could be interesting for a criminal organization. Once they have done that, they start preparing as well. So the normal mode of attack will be via phishing email. So they will try to send an email and then try to get into the network. There are cases, we also know that they use hardware devices to install in the bank infrastructure, but that doesn't happen too often. So once they are able to identify those persons they want to attack, they will send email. They hope that the endpoint where the employee is working will be compromised. And from there, they try then to get more, let's say, tools on the network. Then they try to move around in the network to find their targets. So first of all, they try to get more access to systems. They try to impersonate system administrators. And they really try to find out how the network works and if the network has been set up in a secure way. If not, then it's for them easier to move around. What's specifically interesting for these type of attacks is that they take that time. So once they're in the infrastructure, they normally look around for months, sometimes even longer. They also have then the possibility to monitor employees. So how do they use their applications? How they put input payments? How does the verification works? How is the payment gateway being set up? Are there any vulnerabilities there? So they really take the time. And the last step of such an attack will be the actual exfiltration or sending out of payments or money out of a financial institution. So they really prepare their attack, and then they have on one day, they try then to get the money out, as we have seen in the different cases. So it's really important to understand how they operate. So based on that, you can also define what kind of measures can we take to minimize the risk of being exposed by such an attack. I think it's very difficult to read, so even for me it's difficult to read. But what I will mention, some of the controls that are really important. So I group them per step of the attack. So the first one I mentioned is the reconnaissance, so where a cyber group is trying to get more information about the target, trying to find out who they can specifically target with phishing emails. So one of the first controls is really important, and I want to state here as well, the controls listed here are not only IT and technical controls. There are also a lot of controls related to processes within the company, and especially on the human side. So the first one is really important, is awareness. So your employees should be aware that such attacks do take place, that the normal way of entrance will be a phishing email. So it's really important that your users are being made aware that they have to be vigilant. If they see something, it's also important they know that they have to report that. Secondly, it's also important to test the awareness of your employees. So what you normally do is you also send out, let's say, test phishing emails, which are not malicious, but at the end, the bank can then determine how many people still click on links of suspicious emails. So I think that's really important. Of course, you still need technical control, so you have to try to prevent that an email, first of all, reaches the mailbox of your employee. But in case it does, you also have to ensure that if there's anything malicious in that, that will be removed. So I think that's the first part. The second one is more where they try to get a foothold into the organization. So your endpoint, so that's normally your workstation, should be well protected. It should have all the measures in place so that they can't really exploit it. I think that's one of the more difficult ones as well. Examples are antivirus. You can also run an explorer into a sandbox, as we call that, so that if anything happens, it can't reach your operating system. So this is really technical. And what's really important here is also patch management. So that means if there's a new patch for a vulnerability on the endpoint, you have to ensure that this will be implemented as soon as possible, depending on the vulnerability. So if you look at recent ransomware, so in our case, it was a non-issue because we already patched the endpoint. But there were companies that were not able to do that in a timely way. Regarding elevate access and lateral spread, so that's what I mentioned. Once they are in the network, they try to move around. There are different ways how you can, let's say, prevent that from happening. So on the infrastructure side, you have to ensure that your sensitive systems are in so-called secure zones. That means they are well protected, so you can't really easily reach them. Also, you have to ensure that access management is properly implemented, especially the activity of administrators or high privileged users. They should somehow be constrained. And what's really important, that also security monitoring is in place, so that if anything abnormal happens or there are certain alerts, that your security operating center, if you have one, will pick that up and will take action to prevent that the hackers can go even further. You also have more advanced possibilities like user behavior analytics. That's a little bit a new space where you collect all the activities that a user is performing, and then you will notice that sometimes there are outliers. So, hey, this is not normal. Why is that administrator suddenly going to a server where he normally doesn't go to? The same also when the connection is being made to the internet. There's always a fixed pattern. And by using analytics, you are able to also identify outliers, which could be a potential indicator of an attack currently being conducted. Maybe the last one is, it's really important, I think, where we look at more the process as well on payment systems, where you need a proper 4i principle in place. I think that's logical, but it's still something that needs to be in place. Also on the payment, you need a lot of activity monitoring. So is this a payment that is above a certain threshold, or it fulfills certain requirements, that it will be blocked? We also can look at the high value of payments. And here as well, there's a technology called anomaly detection. It's a little bit like user behavior analytics, where you will know what is your normal pattern of your clients. And then based on the payments being inputted, you can then determine, is this abnormal or not? And based on that, you can then also reduce the number of fraud. I think it's also important to understand your counterparties, so that you have to ensure that you know who your counterparties are, that if you still do business with them, that's fine, but if you don't do business anymore, maybe you need to close the relationship as well, so that no payments can be done anymore with your counterparty. And I think at the end, it's not a matter of if something can happen like this, it's only a question of when. So you have to be prepared. So if you will have a case, are you at the moment prepared? Do you know what to do in such a case? Do you have plans in place? Do you have runbooks in place? If your systems are compromised, then you can't fall back anymore on a backup system. So I think it's really good to understand that you have to be prepared for these kind of cases. Last but not least, there we also have cyber insurance. So if you have some losses, you can still get money back. But be careful. The cyber insurance normally doesn't cover any exfiltration of money. So you need a separate insurance for that. Often that's called the computer crime insurance. So I mentioned a lot of controls. There are many more. It's not the complete overview, so I want to put a disclaimer here, mentioning if you implement everything, you will not have any cases. But then again, what Daniel already mentioned about the Swift customer security program, where they also are going to enforce mandatory controls. So this is also aligned with what we see here. It's maybe not 100%, but there is more or less the same coverage. But we see now a lot of movement in the industry. So one is on the regulatory side. So we get a lot of inquiries from regulators. We get mandatory controls as well that we need to implement. So there's a lot of pressures from regulators. There's a lot of pressures from investors. We get a lot of inquiries regarding cyber. How do we deal with cyber? Even over the weekend, we get a lot of questions from external. Are we well protected or not? So I think that's really important to mention as well. There's a lot of pressure as well from external. So maybe on the next slide, I can show you that on the right-hand side, you have all your controls. But then, of course, how do you implement them? What is in scope for the controls? So it's your input channels. It's normally your payment systems. It's also the market with whom you communicate. So the only thing I want to mention here is not only the controls, but where do they apply? Do you understand your flows within your infrastructure? Be sure that also your third parties you take into account. Also, when you deal with third parties, we have often seen that they don't use the same type of authentication, meaning using a two-factor authentication, or that you even can access the third party outside your own network. So I think there's a lot of consideration here. Just ensure that your own infrastructure, where you process your payments, is properly protected against such type of attacks. So my recommendation would be, and this not only applies for this specific threat, it in principle can be applied for every cyber-related threat. So first of all, you have to understand what are the threats, and are those threats also a risk for you? And here again, I stated, it's not an IT issue, it's a business issue. So even though many of the controls are technical controls, the impact will still be on the business. So the business needs to be part of the discussion. What are your risks? What are your critical applications? Those kind of things. That's really important. What I mentioned before, understand who are your threat actors. How do they operate? Because based on that, you can define your measures. So that are your defense measures. Then you know what you need to have in place. But don't be complacent. The world is changing, so you need to do this periodically, because also cyber criminals, they change their techniques. Then, if you know how they attack your systems, do understand where your critical assets are, your critical applications. Try to defend them first, then go to the other system. So it's really a risk-based approach as well. If there are any gaps, try to remediate them as soon as possible. Again, use a risk-based approach, because you can't protect everything. You have to take certain risks you have to have some kind of risk appetite, because else it will be too costly. Last but not least, remediate and test. So once you have remediated, you also have to test if the controls are working. What we do, for example, we use real ethical hackers, where we define different tests, where we try to infiltrate our systems from external, from internal, also taking the insider threat into scope, where we really try to simulate a real threat actor. We try then to see if any of our controls do fail. We also check if our systems pick certain things up. And if they do, are our security employees reacting in the right way? Are they taking the correct measures? So that's really, as we call it, a red team testing. So we're testing our organization, we're testing our blue team, which is our defenders. So that's really something we also get as a requirement from regulators now, that we need to perform those kind of exercises. But this is a really valuable way of testing how secure and how good your defense measures are. Of course, it's such tests we don't go to the real extreme that we're going to bring systems down and that we have in crisis. So there are some limitations there. So maybe this is then the last slides. Conclusion from my side. We see the attacks are becoming more sophisticated. There are more tools becoming available on, let's say, the dark net, where you also have different services, as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, where it's easy to just get hackers as a service. Sharing threat intel, that's really important. Don't work in isolation. Ensure you have the proper feeds, but also reliable feeds. We get a lot of, they call it indicators of compromise, so certain malware examples. That's great, but that's more operational. We also need to talk with other peers as well, what kind of things they see. And not only once they have an incident, but if they observe certain attacks, then they need to share this information. Again, controls, measures, they are not only IT or technical. There's a lot on the human side. They always try to use social engineering to get into the organization. So it's really important that your employees are vigilant. Again, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So again, be prepared. Are you sure that if there will be a compromise in your systems, you know what to do? So we have done different exercises. So the first one we have done, it's clear nobody knows what to do. But then once you do that on a more frequently basis, the organization is prepared for such kind of incidents. Last but not least, but that's because that's my own responsibility at UBS as well, use red teams. Try to engage with ethical hackers who can simulate the attacks taking place by cyber criminals so that the results are more realistic, so that you know where do you have any gaps, what do you still need to improve. So I would like to conclude my presentation here. If there are any questions, please ask them. You can probably do it in any language you want, and then they probably will translate for me, or if it's German, I probably can answer. But
okay. Thank you, Carlo. Thank you for your overview, and special thank also for your guard function in the market.
Okay, good.
You are involved over the UBS internal outside.
Yeah,
so,
correct. Yeah.
One question, the last bullet here. Do you see a culture of simulation culture here in Switzerland?
I know some that do it, but not too many. I know more in the telco industry, they do that quite heavily. We're discussing as well with peers, they also do it, and we are even discussing now, which is maybe interesting, is to try to attack each other. So we use our red team to test their capabilities and the other way around. And we're also looking at the cyber crisis, let's say, responses. So how can we do those exercises together? So there are some industry-wide exercises that are being done on cyber crisis management, also in the payment industry. But we also try to do it within Switzerland to work with different banks to simulate such an attack. And what do we need to do? So if our payment system is down or we don't trust it anymore, what is our backup? Can we go to our competitors? And the other way around, yes.
Any question from the audience? Ja, da. Da vorne. Den Finger noch einmal aufhaben, bitte.
Sandro Gorkia from SIX. From your experience, through which channels most of the attacks take place? Is it through email?
Yes, the most will come in via email, yes. Okay. So I'm only talking about this specific attack. Of course, we also have e-banking, that's another topic. And that one is the most targeted, to be honest. So.
Okay. So, and is it emails via attachment, or is it just emails?
Often it's an email with a link.
Okay.
Which then, I mean, depending on how they formulate the email, they try to convince the user to click on it. So often they use also social media to find out the profile of the target and then make a specific email that interests the person. So it will not be a standard email, at least not for those type of attacks, that you have a package that arrived and you have to open the attachment. So that is the, let's say, the less sophisticated one where they do mass phishing emails. But if it's really targeted, it's often a link, because links are not that easily, let's say, checked when it comes in, because it's more difficult. So with attachment, it's easier. But still, we have a lot of measures in place to ensure that if you click on the link, that at least it will be blocked if it's malicious. But yes, going back to your question, the first entrance will be most of the time via email. Yeah.
Any other? Dann vielen Dank nochmals, Carlo. Und
Pleasure.
weiter so.
Danke. Ja. Keep your friends on.